Hi everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. Today I'm going to be reading Accidental Bonding. It's a really great one-shot that I really like. If you haven't read Little Acts of Kindness, it's a longer fic that was inspired by this one. It's Midoriya activating erasure and everyone trying to figure out what's going on. It's a great dadzawa fic. I really like this one a lot. Hope you guys enjoy it as well. Like I said, just a one-shot, little over 5,000 words. So it'll only be just this one video. Hope you guys enjoy. It was a few days after the sports festival. They had already filed for their internships, and Mr. Aizawa had finally been allowed to remove all of his bandages. Izuku's stomach had clenched at the sight, feeling guilty that he hadn't been able to do more to help his teacher. Actually, Izuku hadn't really done anything other than get in the way. Maybe if he hadn't been such a useless Deku, then his teacher wouldn't have been left with the permanent scar under his right eye. The first teacher who had ever treated Izuku like he was a person, who had not dismissed him as useless, almost died, and Izuku had been powerless to help him, almost as if he was still quirkless. They hadn't been in school all that long, but he still felt close to his homeroom teacher, even if it was only because Izuku had a quirk now and wasn't considered useless to the general public. The man made time for him. It wasn't like Mr. Aizawa was taking him under his wing or adopting him. That would be crazy. No, it was the little things that might seem unnecessary or insignificant to others that had taken root in Izuku's heart. That filled the part of him that longed to have the acceptance of a teacher, of an adult, someone who wasn't obligated to care about him like his mother or All Might. Those little things meant the world to the child that had been shunned all his life, and he doubted his teacher even realized the impact that he was having. The little encouraging squeezes to his shoulder as his teacher passed by when handing out graded papers, the way he would call on Izuku to answer a question, even though his hand was never raised, not mocking him when he got an answer wrong, and giving him an approving nod when he answered right. The small glimmer of concern in his eyes when he noticed that Izuku would feel overly anxious, and on those days he would leave Izuku in his little bubble during class, not calling on him or drawing attention to him, and slipping a piece of licorice to him before he left class to another teacher. None of the other teachers seemed to focus on him the way Mr. Aizawa did, never stopping to actually listen to what Izuku had to say as if it was important the way he did. And the gruff man actually kept Kachan from attacking him, even reprimanded him. He's never had a teacher do that before. Never knew anyone who looked at his childhood friend and saw anything less than perfection. He had also never had a teacher show such concern for his safety either. He's not talking about at the USJ where Mr. Aizawa had thrown himself into the fight against the villains to protect his students, although that had been one of the bravest things he'd ever seen. Braver even than All Might's debut. It was at the sports festival, though, after his fight with Todoroki, the way his teacher had been there after he had woken up, righteous fury at Izuku's recklessness, had warned Izuku against hurting himself like that, had lectured until Izuku thought his ears were going to fall off. Then, as quick as he came, he was leaving, with a parting pat on the head, and licorice slipped into his hand. His teacher slipped away, telling the problem child not to scare him like that again. Maybe Mr. Aizawa was like this with all of his students. He didn't know for sure. The man was very subtle, and Izuku was too scared to draw attention to himself by asking, not wanting to look like the weirdo who was overly touched by his teacher's kindness. And even if he was treating Izuku just like any other student, it still meant a lot to him. Izuku sighed and rubbed at his eyes. They had been feeling dry for a few days now, burning even. No matter how much sleep he got or how much he rubbed at them, they still bothered him. Maybe it was allergies? All he knew was that they hurt, and it was beginning to give him a headache. A headache that was intensifying as the explosive blonde kept activating his quirk, letting small pops dance across his palms as he growled at Kaminari over something he had said. Kachan was being really sensitive since his win at the sports festival. Really, they should have just let the blonde refuse. He was not happy with it, and who would it have hurt just to let him skip and give the others their medals? It's not like Kachan wanted this. It was getting annoying as the loud boy in front of him kept getting louder. He could see where Mr. Aizawa's eyebrow was twitching in agitation as he watched silently from behind his podium, shuffling through some papers. It wouldn't be long before the man made the teen quiet down. Izuku glared at his friend, wishing he would stop using his quirk in class, a quirk that still made Izuku flinch every now and again from painful memories. His eyes burned more as he glared unblinkingly at Kacchan, who stopped using his quirk all of a sudden. Kacchan glanced at their teacher quickly, before looking around, confused eyes landing on Izuku, before widening in shock. "Deku, what the fuck?" Kacchan screeched. Shota was standing at the podium, shuffling through students' latest test. Some had done better than others, while some failed abysmally. He was ignoring the loud ruckus from Bakugo. For now. The kid had been snapping at people all morning, and as long as he didn't actually blow up anything, then he could ignore it for the moment. He really didn't want to deal with the explosive teen right then. His mind was more preoccupied on thoughts concerning the problem child. Midoriya had been very quiet this morning, avoiding conversation with his friends under the excuse that he had a headache. The kid clearly looked like he was in pain, and his eyes were almost as bloodshot as Shota's. He was seriously considering dismissing him from class and sending him to Recovery Girl to get checked out. She would at least be able to do something about the headache and maybe his eyes, too. Shota was just flipping through the last of the tests, getting them in order to be passed out. Maybe he should do it himself, slip Midoriya licorice and send him off to Recovery Girl in one go. The popping of Bakugo's quirk stopped, and Shota sighed in relief that the kid was finally calmed down, only to snap his head up as the teen screeched, "Deku, what the fuck?" Shota immediately looked to the problem child, knowing that Deku was a cruel nickname that the blonde called him. Midoriya was glaring at Bakugo, well, as much as a cinnamon roll can actually glare, but that's not the part that had everyone's attention. It was his puffy green hair floating up as if he was underwater, and the piercing red eyes. An occurrence that was very familiar to all of them, considering it was Shota's tell and it was what he showed when he was using his quirk. And Midoriya was using erasure. He could tell by the way Bakugo's arms and palms flexed as he tried and failed to activate explosion. Midoriya looked startled at Bakugo's sudden outburst and looked around in wide-eyed confusion at all of his classmates that were gaping at him. "What's wrong, guys? Why are you all staring at me?" Midoriya stuttered, something Shota had thought was finally fading as he got used to all his classmates. "Midoriya," Shota called, drawing the attention of him. "Blink." Midoriya stared at him for a fraction of a second before he complied and winced. Shota knew that feeling all too well. Shota moved from around his podium and made his way over to the door. "You all have a free study period starting now. Ida is in charge and he will pass out your tests. Midoriya, come with me," he called over his shoulder as he opened the classroom door and waited for his student to scuttle out before closing it once and for all to the silent class. He walked down the hallway a bit before stopping and rummaging through one of his pockets in his utility belt, pulling out a small bottle of eye drops. "Tilt your head back and close your eyes." Midoriya was quick to obey, knowing what Shota held in his hand and dying to have some relief for his eyes. Shota cupped Midoriya's cheek to steady himself and dropped 2 drops on the medicine in the corner of both of the kid's eyes. He knew from experience that anyone who wasn't used to having to use eye drops would blink before the medicine dropped or flinch away, dropping them in the corners of the eyes, and then using his fingers to open the closed lids would allow the liquid in the easiest way. He lifted Izuku's lids and then tilted the boy's face around to let the liquid slide over his dry eyes. As an afterthought, he closed Midoriya's eyes back and gently rubbed his thumb over his lids, helping the liquid to seep in more and adding comforting pressure to ease away the soreness. Once done, he let go of his student's face and backed away. Midoriya straightened up, opened his eyes slowly, blinking a few times as his eyes naturally began to produce tears to help moisten his eyes up more. Lucky. "Midoriya," Shota said sternly, drawing the boy's attention and causing him to cower slightly under his gaze. "Care to explain to me how you were using erasure?" Midoriya looked at him, mouth agape, as he processed what Shota had just said. "I what now?" Shota sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Damn, he was worried that the kid wouldn't know what he had done, but it sure would have made things a hell of a lot easier if he had at least some clue. Because Shota was stumped too. The boy's quirk was super strength, so how the hell had he managed to use Shota's quirk? "Kid, you were using erasure to erase Bakugo's quirk. It's why your eyes are so dry right now." Midoriya tucked his fist under his chin and thought, "How can that be? My quirk isn't anything related to erasure. That's impossible." Shota nodded and grabbed him by the elbow, steering him in the direction of Recovery Girl. That's what I'd like to know, too. Maybe Recovery Girl will be able to shed some light onto this. They rounded a corner and almost ran into Present Mike. Shota grunted in greeting and tried to walk around his friend and fellow hero. Mike, who didn't have a class at the moment, changed direction to tag along with them. "Sho, where are you going? Did the little listener already break something this early in the morning?" His friend asked, way too chipper for Shota's taste. Mike walked alongside Midoriya, openly looking over his student to see if there were any obvious injuries. Midoriya blushed, indignant that Mike automatically assumed that he had hurt himself, and frowned at the floor. The kid was not comfortable enough yet with the other teachers to argue or sass them in good nature like the other students. At least he seemed comfortable enough with Shota to actually talk some, even if it was short sentences about things school-related, although he did ask Shota once about how his scarf worked. Magic had clearly not been what the kid was expecting him to say. Shota wasn't too sure how it worked himself. He just knew that it had something to do with responding to Shota's brainwaves and a lot of skill. "Midoriya used erasure during class, and neither of us know how he did it," Shota huffed. It could be anything, really, but he wanted to get Recovery Girl's medical opinion before he jumped to any conclusions. If anyone could pinpoint the cause, it would be her. It was most likely the result of someone accidentally using their quirk on or around Midoriya. Mike stopped in his tracks, shocked, before rushing up to catch up with him. "What the hell?" his loud friend yelled, making Midoriya flinch, and Shota slouch even more in an attempt to escape his friend's loud voice and curious stare. The blond man looked back and forth between Midoriya and Shota before whispering, "You don't think this is another way of the League of Villains messing with us, do you?" Midoriya wrapped his arms around himself, and Shota relinquished his hold on his student's elbow. They were just coming into view of the nurse's office. "It's a possibility, but I doubt it. Whatever it is, it seems harmless. I can still feel my quirk, so I know it wasn't transferred to him. The possibilities are endless, but if anyone can figure out, it's going to be Recovery Girl." Shota pushed through the nurse's door and ushered Midoriya inside. Shuzenji looked up from her files and looked at the three of them before her gaze settled on Midoriya. She huffed and hopped down off her chair, tottering over to them. "What now?" she asked, glaring at the two adults accusingly, like it was somehow their fault for the most accident-prone student was back in her office. Hizashi nudged Midoriya over to an empty cot, while Shota explained, "Somehow, Midoriya was able to use my quirk during class, and he doesn't know how this happened." Shuzenji nodded her head and wandered over to Midoriya. "So, do you think he may have been hit with some unknown quirk that allows him to copy yours?" she asked. "That's what it seems like," he admitted, leaning against the open door. Mike wandered to a chair and flopped gracefully into it, spreading out his long legs as he observed everyone. "Midoriya, do you remember being hit by a quirk or feeling strange at all recently?" Recovery Girl asked, using her grandmotherly tone as she reserved for people when they weren't being fuck-ups. Midoriya shook his head, no, before pausing. Well, for a few days my eyes have felt really dry, but that could be because of Mr. Aizawa's quirk. I thought it was just allergies, but other than that, nothing, sorry." Recovery Girl, she patted his knee and wandered over to her cabinet that contained medical equipment. "Don't apologize, dear, you've done nothing wrong." She rummaged around in her cabinet before she found what she wanted. It was a scanner that most hospitals had that could scan the brain and show if anyone was under the effects of someone else's quirk. It was an expensive device that scanned a person's brain waves. When a person is under a quirk that controls them or alters them in some way, different parts of the brain will be affected and will show more activity than is normal. It also shows the effects of a person using their own quirk, letting them watch as the person's brain waves changed in response to the quirk's activation. She held the small device up and scanned Midoriya's head. She looked at the screen and then looked at Midoriya before looking at the screen again, a deep frown settling on her face. Shota looked at her growing confusion and asked when he couldn't control his curiosity anymore, "What's wrong?" She looked at him before looking back at his student. "Shota, he isn't under the impression of another quirk." She held up the scanner to Midoriya's head. "I need you to activate erasure again." Midoriya was looking between the device and Shota, confused and a little frightened over the fact that he wasn't under someone's quirk, that it was all him. Honestly, Shota was just as confused as Midoriya. His student gulped before glancing over at Present Mike, who had been silent the entire time and watching them all intensely, and activated erasure. Mike opened his mouth to let out a quirk-induced shout, only for a normal volume one to come out instead. He tried a few more times before letting Midoriya deactivate erasure. "Freaky," Mike whispered, leaning back in his chair and rubbing at his mustache, something he was prone to do while thinking. Shuzenji then turned to Shota and Hisashi and made shooing motions. Out, the both of you. I need to run some more tests. Mike launched from his seat and scurried out of the room. He always had been afraid of the little woman since they were in school, and he had accidentally deafened his whole class temporarily. She had yelled at him for his carelessness. Shota nodded his head and calmly left the room, letting them know that they would be waiting outside. Izuku sat on the bed nervously as Recovery Girl pulled up his file. He still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that this wasn't the cause of someone else's rogue quirk, but he himself doing this. He was quirkless before he met All Might. This was physically impossible. That's what I'd like to know too, Recovery Girl muttered. Oh, he had said that out loud. Recovery Girl pulled up the hated x-ray of his toe where he was from when he was 4 and turned the screen to him. This clearly shows that you have the double toe joint, which is associated with all quirkless people, which is proof that you should not be showing signs of a quirk that isn't one for all. Izuku nodded his head. I know, so how is this possible? And why erasure of all things? Recovery Girl sighed. I would like to take another x-ray of your toe. Something just isn't adding up. The x-ray didn't take much time, and as soon as an image was uploading onto the computer, and it was startling to both of them. Although Recovery Girl did have her suspicions, there on the screen, clear as day, was Izuku's toe that did not have a toe joint, a second one. What? Recovery Girl scowled and looked over to the shocked teen. Midoriya, you were never quirkless. It was just very late in revealing itself. I'm going to have a colleague come in who can examine your quirk. Then we can see exactly what quirk it is and explain to you in depth about erasure. Although I'm sure Aizawa can help you with that one as well. But we don't know for sure if it's exactly like his or not. So for now, I suggest you don't use it too much. Your body isn't used to the dry eye yet. I have a bone to pick with the idiot doctor that lied to you. When I get my hands on him, they'll be lucky if they're allowed to be doctors to animals. Izuku just stared at her in shock as she called his teachers back in. He had a quirk that was all his. He had erasure. Shota and Mike ambled back into the room where they were called. An x-ray of Midoriya's foot was on the screen. He looked at the boy who looked like he was in shock. Not surprising, finding out you have another quirk. That was completely unrelated to the other. It must be mind-boggling for him. Mike went and slumped back in his seat, looking over at Midoriya in concern. If he kept his mouth hanging open like that, he was bound to catch a fly. Shota walked over to Midoriya and pushed his mouth closed. The kid didn't so much as react, staring faintly at the x-ray. He was starting to get concerned that his student was going into shock and was about to ask Shuzenji for a shock blanket when she spoke. Aizawa, I need you to be honest with me. Shota looked at her in confusion. When was he not honest with her? He had known her since he was a teenager, stumbling through life and into the hero course. Is Midoriya Izuku your illegitimate love child? What? What? Mike and Midoriya shrieked at the same time. He would be glad the kid was finally reacting, but now it just seemed that he was going into shock too. No way, RG, Mike yelled, jumping to his feet and pointing wildly at Shota, who just stood there dumbly at this point. Shota's gay as hell. He always has been. And what you're suggesting would mean that in some fucked up way, a 14-year-old Shota and an adult Mrs. Midoriya conceived a child together? Normally, Shota would have been pissed that Mike had outed him in front of his student, but it felt like he was drowning in a sea of, what the fuck? Shuzenji pointed her cane at Mike and ground out, I know that. But the fact is that Midoriya has erasure. He's only shown signs of erasure. If it was a copy quirk, then why Shota? Why and how did he copy his quirk? Why not his classmates or his mother? He's around them more. Shota looked down at Midoriya, who seemed aghast at the idea that she thought Shota could be his father. Same. Not that he didn't care for his reckless problem child, but he wasn't Shota's child. Cover your ears, Shota told Midoriya. The teen hurriedly pressed his hands tight over his ears, and Shota added his own too before whispering over his shoulder to Shuzenji, I know for a fact that I have not slept with a woman, and have only ever been with men. He glanced over to Mike, who was nodding his head. There is no way he is my child. No way at all. There has to be another explanation. He removed his hands from Midoriya's ears, tugging the teen's hands down too. Mike rubbed at his mustache, tugging at the corner of one as he thought, but how did he use erasure? If it's copy quirk, then why you, Sho? Did you come into contact with him at all today? Shota and Midoriya both shook their heads. Shuzenji sighed and hopped back onto her chair. Well, I'll send a message to my colleague who can identify quirks by looking at a person. I trust them, and I know that they'll be able to tell us exactly what's going on and why it's only happening now. I'll get them to come over as soon as they can. Shota nodded down at his student. Shota sat with a hand on Midoriya's shoulder and crouched down and to look at him in the eyes. We'll figure this mess out, but for now, just stay here. I'm sure you don't want your friends bombarding you with questions that you don't have the answers to. Midoriya nodded his head and twisted his fingers together, a nervous habit the kid seemed to have. Are you going back to the class? Midoriya asked softly. He saw Mike smirk at him before quietly leaving the room with Shuzenji. He had planned on going back and trying to resume what was left of his homeroom before he needed to move on for the day. But the kid's hesitant tone implied that he didn't want Shota to leave him alone after everything that had just happened. Midoriya trusted him, and he didn't want to do anything to break that trust. He could tell from the short amount of time that he had known the kid that he was probably bullied. Why, he had no clue, and he didn't seem to truly trust the adults around him. Somebody had hurt this kid enough to make him this timid and untrusting. Shota was not going to add to that hurt, even if it was logical for him to resume his responsibilities, but he figured it wouldn't hurt to make Midoriya his top priority for the day. I wasn't planning on going anywhere, Shota lied, patting the kid on the head as he made his way over to the chair that Mike had just vacated. Midoriya seemed relieved that Shota was staying, so he slouched down in the chair and drifted into a light sleep as the problem child fiddled with his phone, waiting for the colleague to arrive. Shota, Mike, Midoriya, and Shuzenji all sat there in shock as the quirk specialist explained to them what Midoriya's quirk was. Both Shota and Midoriya were blushing embarrassedly from the explanation, while Mike rocked with laughter and Shuzenji smiled softly. Midoriya's quirk was a mixture of a bonding and a copying quirk. Basically, whoever the kid formed a strong attachment to, it didn't work on family, he would bond to them and be able to copy their quirk. Midoriya had somehow gotten attached enough to Shota that he formed a bond and was able to copy Erasure. He had bonded with Shota. It was a little awkward when Mike stopped laughing long enough to ask Midoriya why he never bonded with anyone else before. It was awkward because Midoriya hesitated in telling them. Then it was sad and infuriating to hear that because he was such a late bloomer, that everyone else assumed that he was quirkless, and because of that he was bullied. His only friend had been Bakugo, but the boy quickly turned on him, and that had ended their friendship. If Bakugo hadn't turned on probably the best friend he could ever have, Shota's sure that Midoriya would have bonded with him. Maybe a bond even had begun to form if Midoriya's attachment to the boy was any indication, but the betrayal had probably broken it. Midoriya had a quirk that had the potential to be very powerful if he was able to learn to trust others more and bond with them. The kid did not seem to have trouble making friends or getting along with others. Hell, maybe the reason his quirk is so similar to All Might's was because he had unknowingly bonded with the big buffoon. He could see how Midoriya would assume that his quirk was super strength if that was the case. The kid just needed to learn to trust, but there was plenty of time for that. For now, he would continue to watch over the kid and train him on how to best use his quirk. The specialist told him that he would keep Erasure for as long as he was bonded with Shota. Not like Shota would do anything to break that bond. It was nice to know that his student trusted him so much. He's not sure he's ever had a student that felt any type of fondness for him before. They respected him, but they were always too intimidated by him. Despite the fact that, as their homeroom teacher, he had to basically act like an extra parent, Midoriya bonding to him was kind of flattering, knowing that just the kind of good impact he was making on his student's life. The specialist also told him that he could just relax his quirk and Erasure would slip into the depths of his quirk waiting to be called on again. Midoriya sighed as he relaxed his quirk and the dry eye faded. It was lunchtime, and as much as he dreaded the teasing from students and teachers about this new revelation, he knew it couldn't be kept secret forever. So he shooed Midoriya off to lunch and told him he was in fact allowed to tell all of his annoying friends, just like Mike was going to do with theirs. Shota sat in the teacher's lounge, wrapped up in a sleeping bag in the corner and sipping on a jelly pouch. Mike and Midnight were bursting at the seams with laughter, all at his expense. Midnight tore herself away from Mike, staggered over to him, drunk on the hilarity of the situation. Shota, you should know better than to try and keep your child a secret from your friends. You can't keep them all to yourself. Mike snickered behind his hand as Shota glared at his friends. The other teachers were keeping their laughter hidden, though, but he knew they were laughing. Midnight, Shota growled, eyes flashing red. You know that he isn't my kid. Midnight wiped away the tears in the corners of her eyes and smiled devilishly at him. Oh, sweetie, you are so wrong, so very wrong. Mike snorted and joined in. Yeah, Sho, think about it. Midoriya was so fond of you that he formed a bond. Students don't just bond with their grumpy teachers. Not unless... No, Shota denied. They see you as a parent, Midnight finished. Shota buried his face in his hands. You're wrong, he groaned. The 18-plus hero crouched down and patted him on the top of his head in fake sympathy. Sorry, babe, but you know we're right. Welcome to fatherhood, Shota, Mike teased. He knew that Shota had given up on the idea of ever having children on his own, or even adopting. Being secretly gay and an underground hero with many enemies just made being a father nothing more than a dream to him. He knew Mike was probably secretly happy that, in a strange way, Shota was getting what he always wanted, a kid. Shota knew that the kid would bond with other adults, was probably bonded with All Might, but he couldn't stop the soft flutter in his heart that liked the idea that Midoriya might consider him a father figure. No, it was better not to get his hopes up. Midoriya was his student, just his student. So when are we adopting him? Mike questions him quickly as he gave Shota a juice box in place of an empty jelly pouch. I don't know, he responds automatically. Damn it, Hizashi. So, Uraraka nudges Izuku in the arms and waggles her eyebrows at him. Does this mean you kind of see Mr. Aizawa like a dad? Izuku shrugged as he ate his rice, not paying attention to the conversation due to how embarrassed he still was over the whole thing and having to tell his troll friends. At least Ito hadn't overreacted like everyone else, just spouting facts about why Mr. Aizawa was worthy of bonding with. I guess I do. I can't remember my dad, and Mr. Aizawa is very dad-like. I guess I wouldn't mind him being my dad. Everyone at the table awed at him all at once with the faint whisper of secret love child from Todoroki. Izuku's mind finally caught up with what his mouth had just said, and he blushed so hard that he got dizzy as the blood rushed right to his face. What have I just done? No one noticed, though, as Snipe rushed out of the cafeteria squealing like a little country girl as he skipped to the teacher's lounge to relay what he had just heard. Izuku and Shota had permanent blushes for a week after that, but neither of them could find it in their hearts to really be upset over it. Okay, guys, that concludes Accidental Bonding. I really like this fic a lot. Like I said before, if you haven't read Little Acts of Kindness, that was based off of this fic. And I really, really like it a lot. It's such a great dadzawa fic that, they had here. It's really great. You get to see the relationship between the two of them. And it starts as early as right after the sports festival in this one, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. I hope you guys enjoyed this one as well. And I hope you guys also are dropping down any recommendations you have for other fics that you want me to read or that you'd like to hear. As always, I appreciate it. So thanks so much.